What's up, guys, and welcome to the Bleeding BnG podcast. I'm your host, Jalen. So, like I was saying, this is the Bleeding BnG podcast, also known as Bleeding Burgundy and Gold, where we'll be your news source for everything Washington football team 24/7, 365 days a year. I'm talking about podcast episodes. I'm talking about YouTube content, social media content across Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, as I previously mentioned. Anything that you're looking for the Washington football team, we're going to be giving it to you. So like I was saying, this is just our first episode, our pilot. So I wanted to take that time to introduce ourselves. And I want to just take some time to put a bow and a wrap up on the 2020 season that ended about a week and a half ago with our Washington football team finishing with a 7-9 record, but also finishing as NFC East champions, losing to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Wild Card weekend of the NFL playoffs. So we're going to go ahead and put a bow on that, and then we're going to touch bases on the 2021 season as we look forward, because it's projected to be a big year for not only the Washington football team, but for us over at Bleeding BnG as well. So as I was saying, we're just going to look back at the 2020 season really quick. It was a roller coaster ride of a season with a bunch of low points and a bunch of high points. Starting out over a year ago with Coach Ron Rivera getting hired, and then all the stuff that we had to deal with throughout the offseason. Whether that be the name change, dealing with the sexual harassment allegations that are still ongoing, or whether that be Coach Rivera getting diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of training camp. There was a lot of things that us as an organization had to face before we even stepped on foot to the playing field. And it all came to a head in week one, where we had a big upset victory over the Philadelphia Eagles, where we came back from 17 points down. And we started on the high. That was the high point of that roller coaster ride that I was telling you about. And then Lord knows those next 5 weeks took us back down to that low point, where we finished with a record of 1-5 throughout that period, resulting in the benching of Dwayne Haskins. Things did not look bright. If I'm being completely honest, if you would have asked a Washington football fan in September or October, if you would have told them that you guys would be NFC East champions come January, nobody would have believed you, especially not the way things started. But I just wanted to touch bases on what I thought was the turning point for not only the team, but for a particular player as well. And this game, this moment, this play, I believe, had an effect on not only the player, but the entire organization. And hopefully turned our fortunes around for not only this past season, but for our future, for many years to come. And I want to talk about the play that I'm talking about is when Chase Young actually hit Joe Burrow on the goal line against the Cincinnati Bengals. And the reason that I say that I believe that this was the turning point in this season is because after that play, if you guys can remember, Joe Burrow rolled out to the right and almost scored a touchdown, but Chase Young met him all the way from the other side of the formation, head on, hit him, knocked the ball out, ultimately resulting in us getting the possession back. And I said that this was the turning point in the season because I started to see a flip switch with Chase after that. He did come out guns a-blazing at the beginning of the season against the Philadelphia Eagles, registering 1.5 sacks and also forcing a fumble. But after his injury that he sustained in week 3 against the Cleveland Browns, he wasn't moving as explosive and he wasn't moving as dynamic as we have become to see him, especially with him coming out of Ohio State, and especially with him producing in those first 2 games. I think he had 2.5 sacks through his first 2 games. But once he returned from that Cleveland, from the injury he sustained against Cleveland, he just wasn't moving the same. He wasn't the same dynamic athlete that I'm used to seeing on film. I've been used to seeing since DeMatha High School. So as I was saying before, guys, I believe that this play flipped the switch for not only Chase as a player, but for the team as a whole. Because if you guys can go back to that game, the Cincinnati Bengal game came right after what was arguably Chase's worst game as a Washington football team member, and that was against the Detroit Lions. He probably played, like I said, his worst game, and at the end, he actually had the roughing the passer penalty that resulted in Detroit getting in the field goal range to ultimately win the game. So the the Cincinnati Bengal game came directly after that, and the Washington football team came out pretty slow to start that game, if I do say so myself. Cincinnati, Joe Burrow, and those receivers were driving up and down the field. But what I can remember is that they didn't get as many points as they could have because they had their fair share of issues in the red zone, and I think they missed a field goal as well. So, like I was saying, they were moving up and down the field, moving on that drive as well of the goal line stand that I had mentioned, and it was almost as if Chase Young said he had enough. It was time to turn the switch on and to be the player that everybody knows him to be coming out. Everybody expected him to be the generational talent that everybody expected him to be coming out of Ohio State, the Ohio State University. Excuse me. He had not. If you guys can go back, if anybody has the capability of going back and rewatching NFL games, look at the way that Chase was moving in that before that fumble, before that hit, and look at the way that he was moving after, and look at the concurrent games that came after that game. He just turned into a different animal. He turned into a different beast. He turned into the guy that started to galvanize his other teammates, and this is one of the reasons why I said that this was a big turning point moment for not only Chase but for the organization as well. Because after that game, after that moment, we started to see Chase become a leader. We started to see him step up. We started to see him lead in pregame huddles. We started to see him, galvanizing the offense when he wasn't on the field, standing next to offensive coaches. I know by now everybody has seen the viral moment where he came to check on Taylor Heineke and Heineke's first action against the Carolina Panthers. And that's the kind of guy that I knew Chase to be from Ohio State. And after that play against the Cincinnati Bengals, it was like the light switched on. He was like, I know that at least 95 to 97% of the time that I step on this football field, I'm the baddest dude on this football field. And it's almost like he took that approach and he just went with him for the rest of the season. If you guys can remember, after that Cincinnati game came Antonio Gibson's breakout game against the Dallas Cowboys. Chase was a monster in that game, registering a sack and having tons of pressure. And then right after the win against the Cowboys came us snapping the Pittsburgh Steelers undefeated 11-0 streak. So I believe that, like I said, that moment was not only huge for Chase, but huge for the team as well, because I'm a huge believer in when your best players are your leaders, those create the best teams and the best organizations. And I know it's early in his career. I know he just wrapped up his first season, but I personally believe that Chase is the best player and has the most talent on the Washington football team. So once you saw him start to step up and lead these guys, these group of men as a rookie, which is something you don't see, especially with him getting his captaincy within the last couple of weeks of the season, which is a rare sighting in the NFL. It began to, turn the fortunes around for not only the team, but hopefully for the organization as well, because that young, exuberant energy from a leader can be something that can be sustained for a long period of time, especially with somebody as young as Chase. So to just put a bow on the 2021 season, I do want to go back to our loss against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that I mentioned we had in the Super Wildcard weekend of the playoffs. It's been about a week and a half since that game, and throughout the Washington football team community and things like that, I have heard people, ready to anoint Taylor Heineke our starter. And I do want to get touch bases on Taylor Heineke's performance that he had against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was nothing short of remarkable, spectacular, magnificent. I don't have enough adjectives to describe the performance that Mr. Heineke had put on against the Buccaneers in that playoff game. Unlike a lot of people throughout the Washington football team, I kind of had a sense of who Taylor Heineke was before he joined us earlier this season or late last season. He actually played with a buddy of mine, a high school teammate of mine at ODU. And I actually was live in person with the game that he threw for over 700 yards against Maine, if I can remember correctly. So like I said, while I did see some of this stuff, some of the tangible things that Taylor Heineke did on the FCS level, I had no clue that he would go ahead and ball like that on the NFL playoff stage with barely getting the amount of reps and barely getting any time running with the starters throughout this season, and being in the building less than 3 or 4 weeks at the most. He really the performance that he put on that night was simply something truly remarkable, especially when you consider the fact that a couple of days ago that the same Tampa Bay Bucks defense, minus just Devin White, made Drew Brees look like a shell of himself with him throwing 3 interceptions. No, well, I'm not saying that Taylor Heineke is better than Drew Brees or is the next coming to Drew Brees in a one-off game sample between similar defenses or the same defense minus one impact player. Taylor Heineke performed 10 times better than Drew Brees did the other night. So like I was saying, guys, I did see some of Taylor Heineke while he was at ODU. And some of the things that he displayed in his 2 drives against the Panthers, as well as the game against the Buccaneers, was some of the things that I saw in college, what made me believe that he can be an effective effective NFL quarterback, not a starter, but somebody that can be on an NFL roster. And one of those things that I saw while I was watching him throughout college was Taylor has an amazing feel for the game. If you look back at the game against the Buccaneers, you saw that he knew where his scramble lanes were when he broke the pocket. For somebody so small, or for somebody that small, standing only at 6'1", you saw the tremendous pocket presence that he had throughout the game. You saw that when he was able to get the ball off, he was, putting the ball where only his receivers can make a play, preventing turnovers. I think he only had one off-target throw, if I can remember correctly, and that was the ball over the middle that came off Logan Thomas's hands. So like I was saying, the feel for the game was something that I noticed Taylor had a long time ago. While as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the Washington football team community is ready to anoint him the franchise quarterback and ready to have him be the starter going into 2021. I will not go that far just yet. However, I do think at the very least that he has earned a right to, be on the roster. I think he's earned a roster spot at the very least in 2021 with the chance to compete with whoever they bring in, whether that be bringing in Kyle Allen back, whether that be Alex Smith returning, or a QB plan down the line, which we'll touch base on soon. Whoever he's brought in to compete with, I believe that he has earned the right to compete for a spot in training camp. And the reason that I'm so hesitant on anointing him the franchise quarterback or our savior just yet is because I believe that this defense is honestly elite enough to compete for a championship now. I believe that our window for a championship starts now. I believe that it honestly started last year. I believe that this defense from 2020 was elite enough to win us a championship with other parts built around the team. So the reason that I'm hesitant on anointing Heineke the starter just yet is because we're not sure. He has limited game film on him, limited game experience. So maybe somebody more of a sure thing could be able to carry this defense in this window where they're ready to compete for a championship. Because we know in this modern NFL, these windows don't last long with these 3, 4, 5-year contracts that get shelved in and out. Especially with the defensive line. I know Matt Ioannidis just received a contract extension last year. A new contract. John Allen just signed his contract extension, so he should be up for a big payday coming up. And then after that, what you have, Deron Payne coming after that, Tim Settle coming after that, Montez Sweat, and then finality, Chase Young, who would seem to be the biggest contract of them all. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to sign those guys to their worth once all their contracts come up. So we need to take advantage of this this elite defensive team scheme window, so hopefully we can compete for the championship. So I do want to mention that today is actually Wednesday, January 20th. Over the past couple of days, we have got some front office news from the Washington football team. So yesterday reports came out that the team was actually finalizing a deal with former Carolina Panthers GM Marty Hurney, and he was actually the GM that signed Ron to Ron's first head coaching deal in Carolina in 2011. Hurney has spent 2 terms as the Panthers GM, and while I was kind of skeptical of the move before, I know us throughout the Washington football team communities, we have heard Hurney's name, being mentioned throughout the rumor mill, being connected to Washington over the last couple of weeks. And while I was skeptical, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of the news when I first heard it, after doing more research, I believe that, this may be the right move. So Coach Ron Rivera, with his coach-centric approach, we see that he obviously is putting an emphasis on continuity and comfortability. So hiring somebody that he knows, that he's been around with, that he has the same philosophies as, can only help. One thing that I think Coach Rivera has earned from us as fans is our patience, especially after this season, and his trust. I know a lot of us, and rightfully so, we're at Coach Ron's neck at the beginning of the season. when he was, sitting on timeouts, and his explanations not matching up with his actions towards the end of the game. But I believe that throughout this season, Coach Rivera has shown that he is more than capable of being the guy to right this ship and to be the guy to run this organization. So like I was saying, I believe at the very least he has earned our patience throughout at least this season, and his trust with the moves that he's making with his coach-centric approach. Evidently, he has owner Dan Snyder's, confidence and belief with him giving him this coach-centric approach model. So us as fans, I just ask that we be patient as well. And then the Washington football team had also brought in former Detroit Lions GM and VP of player personnel for the San Francisco 49ers, Marty Mayhew. They brought him in to join the front office as well. So those are two guys with over 60 years of experience that I believe can help right this ship and continue riding these strong fortunes that we've been riding since, November. The structure of an organization is only as good as its top people. So bringing in high level people such as Hurney and Mayhew can only help. But I do want to mention this. I would be remiss to not notice a pattern in these hirings. So as I was mentioning before, I'm not sure what the QB plan is going to be for 2020. And while I do want Taylor Heineke on the roster, I'm not sure if he's the starter. And I know a lot of people in the Washington football team community don't want to hear me say this, because I know the report that came out with Adam Schefter concerning this name a couple weeks ago turned a lot of fans off. I saw a lot of people on the timelines, a lot of people on the discussion boards turned off completely by the fact that we may bring in Cam Newton next season. And I was one of those guys as well, honestly. To me, Cam looked like a shell of himself with the Patriots throughout this past season. But I'm going to be 100% honest. I do think that a move like that is more likely when you bring in a guy like Hurney, who actually is the GM who brought Cam into the league. He's the GM that drafted Cam #1 overall in 2011. So I believe that Cam Newton may be in play for the quarterback market, for the quarterback position, quarterback X, as I know JP Finley likes to call it, in 2021. Also, when you bring in a guy like Martin Mayhew, who when he was first, elected general manager in Detroit for the Detroit Lions, his first actual draft pick was Matthew Stafford, and that's a name that's actually been on the rumor mill, being connected to trading, being on the trading block, maybe a potential trading partner with Washington. That's a name that I think is now more likely to end up, on the Washington football team in 2021. Just basically off the connections with the front office, those are two names to watch out for regarding the quarterback position in 2021. And that's Cam Newton and Matthew Stafford. Out of those two, I would preferably bring in a Stafford because, like I said, last season, Cam just looked like a shell of himself to me. He still was pretty dynamic when he was able to run the ball, but he didn't look like he could push the ball downfield as consistently as we're used to seeing somebody who's a dynamic athlete like Cam do. And Cam has shoulder surgery, and that takes a lot out of a quarterback. So while I was opposed to Cam Newton being brought in earlier a couple weeks ago, I do think that it is more likely now with somebody like Hurney being into the fold now. And then with Stafford, dealing with Martin Mayhew, I also think that he, like I said, he's my preference. I think he has a little bit more juice left in the tank, even though he's been in the league longer than Cam. He doesn't have much wear and tear on his body, even though he did sustain a back injury in 2019. I just think that he has a lot more left in the tank, and I think it's time for him and Detroit to have a change of scenery. I think that's the best for both organizations. So out of those two, between Cam Newton and Matthew Stafford, I would prefer Stafford, because I think Stafford is one of those QBs that can help us compete for a title and help carry this, or help ride the tails of this defense all the way to a championship. Stafford is somebody who's had multiple 5,000-yard passing seasons. He was on pace for another one just 2 years ago before his back injury. And despite the dysfunction in Detroit, this season, nobody can say that Matthew Stafford was the sole reason that the Detroit Lions didn't perform to the best of their capabilities. He was missing his number one receiver in Kenny Galladay for a majority of the season. So out of those two, and with the connections that our two recent hires in the front office have, I would definitely prefer Matthew Stafford over Cam Newton. But be on the lookout for those two names, because those two names will come up on the rumor mill. So we will be pushing out these episodes once a week, guys. So like I said, just be on the lookout for them. We're going to be pushing out this content a lot on our Twitter pages and on our Instagram page. So in our upcoming episodes, we will be having a free agency preview with the new league year set to begin March 17th. We're also going to do a lot of NFL draft work with the NFL draft set to start April 29th. So we're going to be pushing out a lot of content over here on Bleeding BnG. But I want you guys first to follow our Instagram at Bleeding BnG, and that's BLEEDING BNG. And then I want you guys to follow our Twitter as well, and that's Bleeding BnG. But the spelling's a tad bit different. It's BLEEDINBNG. So it's only one G in our Twitter handle. And like I said, guys, we're going to be pushing out a lot of this content. We're giving you everything Washington football team 24/7, 365 days out of the year. So just be on the lookout for us. And thank you for tuning into our first episode.